Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Werby, Director of the New School's Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. It's a pleasure to see you all. Welcome. This is the second event in our annual program series, Creating an Inclusive Economy, Pathways for Impact Entrepreneurs. Before I introduce Mary Watson, I just want to mention that this evening's event will be live streamed. So for those of us who are not in this room, we'll also be able to share the discussion with a broader audience. I'll share more about the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative later after the panel discussion before we invite you to a networking reception. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Watson, Dean of the Schools of Public Engagement at the New School.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So it's very exciting to be here tonight. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm Mary Watson, Executive Dean of the Schools of Public Engagement, which is a college of the New School, which has a very storied and interesting history, which I'll tell you a little bit about in just a moment. So just drawing our eyes to the current moment in which we find ourselves, it looks to my eye like everywhere we look in the world, we see headlines about the failures of leadership and our doubts in the failures of organizations. And so as we look around at our businesses and public institutions and government, we're asking ourselves, why aren't we doing better than we're doing? And we should be better than that. And as our organizations are rapidly evolving and we're looking to the so-called new generations of leaders who will remake them and indeed remake our entire economy, we have to find ways that will remake it in a way that is more just, more equitable, and sustainable. So one of the things I love the most about the New School, and there's a long list of those things, is that we are committed to engaging in the real world problems of the day. So if you think about the time when the New School was founded in 1919, this was a moment of significant turmoil across the global landscape. It was a time when there was rising fascism in Europe, there was war spirit and war sentiment around the world, there was rising nationalism, there were questions of loyalty oaths to the government, and a lot of complex dynamics. And at that time, 6 individuals left Columbia University to found the New School as a different kind of institution of learning, where learning was lifelong, it was engaged in the real world context of the day, and the scholarship that was created was designed to be purposeful and activist in the world. So here we are 100 years later. We are getting ready to celebrate our centennial next year, and we ask ourselves, to what extent are those conditions upon which the New School were founded still reoccurring today? And I could point to some current events, but I won't, except to say that, we find that some of these similar dynamics are still part of our global landscape. And so the advantage of the New School is that we are seen by our outside constituents and by our communities inside the university as a different kind of place. And one of the things that does for us is it attracts to our university students who believe that things are possible here that aren't possible elsewhere, who come here to make things that they are very committed to, but maybe no one else understands. I like to joke that New School students are only interested in doing things that are impossible. And since most of the things that we're facing right now seem pretty impossible, that seems apropos. And so our work here on Impact Entrepreneurship is really to try to find a way to support all of our students in finding ways to make their ideas into ways that remake the world in a more just and inclusive place and the economy to accordingly be such. This involves a lot of things, including leadership development with empathy and resilience, but it also involves the kind of work we're going to talk about tonight, which is how one becomes and maintains being an entrepreneur in this complicated landscape. So as you may hear more about later, the Kaufman Foundation has generously supported our work on this front, and we this fall are launching a fellowship program in the impact entrepreneurship space where we have students from 9 different graduate programs, 18 students from 9 programs across the university who've entered a 2-year fellowship program. And I think some of you I recognize are here tonight. I won't call you out, but I will challenge you to introduce yourself to someone who might have funding for your idea before you leave the room room this evening. This is a very exciting moment for us, and I want to particularly thank Michele Kahana, Associate Dean of our college and also Professor at the Milano School and Faculty Director of the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative, and Elizabeth Werby, who you just met, directing the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative, to help us launch this university-wide entrepreneurship initiative that really is organized towards creating an inclusive economy. There are many staff and faculty also to mention, so I'll name a few and hope that I don't miss anyone. But these include Sujatha Jesudasan, Cynthia Lawson, Jen Vandermeer, Latha Pumanali, Charles Allison, Dennis Derrick, Jamer Hunt, Rhea Alexander, Dave Carroll, Diana Aitenshenker, Linda St. Mark, and many, many more. And a reminder that in the work that we're thinking about in entrepreneurship, we're looking at projects that are just, that are inclusive, that reject the idea of the single ideator being the energy for all sources, but that actually this is a project of groups and teams of diverse people with commitment to creating a new and better way. And then finally, just in closing, I want to thank you all for joining us and to thank our panelists. We're very excited to hear your insights and ideas, and no pressure, hear all about the easy way forward, which I suspect you'll tell us it's a little bit more complicated than that. We are very happy to have you here tonight, so thank you for joining us. So let me now turn the podium over to Michele Kahana, Faculty Director of the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. Thank you for coming.
So thank you, Mary. Mary has been an amazing supporter of students and this initiative, and really trying to help people realize their potential. So thank you, Mary. So welcome to the new school. I'm Michele Kahana, and as Mary said, I'm the faculty director and work closely with Elizabeth in the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. So we're living in a time of massive transition and social, economic, and we're reminded every day political. And one part of this transition that's really critical is inclusion. And so we're incredibly committed to creating, as we've titled this speaker series, creating an inclusive economy. And that requires leaders who are committed to the notion of inclusion, and that looks different in different contexts here in the US, globally, and we're going to explore that question of inclusion today and how entrepreneurs and leaders are approaching it. It affects everything organizations and companies do, how they hire, who leads, and how they lead. And what are the products and services that are being provided to communities around the world, and who's excluded from them? How does capital flow into these ventures, and how does it not? And so we're going to be looking at these questions in different ways. You will note that there are massive range of conversations that are going to happen in this panel. People are coming at this from very different ways. They're working in different sectors and different geographies. They're at different stages of their venture development. And so we want to embrace all of that. And we also want to recognize that this is hard work. Many of our panelists have learned a lot along the way about what to do and what not to do, and we want to be open and listening to that, because as people who are ourselves interested in making change happen, we want to learn from them. So I am excited to be moderating this panel, and I want to invite our wonderful speakers up to the stage. I'll start naming each, and you can just come up. We have Anurag Gupta, who is the founder and CEO of Bmore America. Diana Mao, who is co-founder and president of Nomi Network. Monisha Raja, who is the founder and creative director of Love is And also, I should say, a graduate of Parsons, so that's also something we can talk about later. And then Clayton Banks, co-founder and CEO of Silicon Harlem. So one of our speakers, unfortunately, Keith Mauppa, who's up here, is sick tonight, so he won't be here, and he sends his apologies, and hopefully we'll have him here for next speaker series panel. I just want to say that the agenda for this evening is structured in the following way. We'll have a panel conversation that I'll moderate for a while, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And then Elizabeth Werby will come back and tell us a little bit more about the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative and how you can get involved in different ways. And then we'll have a reception with wine and some goodies as well. So I want to start by first joining the panel. And we'll do that. And then I want to invite Anu. Who's going to help us become more present in this room today and help us transition to this moment from a very hectic, possibly even tiring day, so that we can be together here. So, Anu.
So thanks so much. Y'all can hear me? So I'm just going to invite you all to do a short mindfulness exercise, just 120 seconds. But, we're going to be talking about inclusion. We're going to be talking about the economy, diversity, equity, all these ideas, bias potentially. So they have so many ideas associated with them. So just to land here for all of us together. So I'm going to invite you all to come to a comfortable seated position, as comfortable you can be on these chairs, placing both your feet on the ground below you. And then you can rest your hands either on your lap or on your knees, your shoulders relaxed, your jaw relaxed. Really just 120 seconds. You can keep your eyes open, look at something that's stationary in front of you, or bring your eyes to a gentle close. And just in this moment, just come to a comfortable place where you can just rest in your body. Notice any tension, any holding that may be in your eyeballs, eye sockets, your jaw, your tongue. And see if you can relax, release. Just softening the ends of your eyes, the ends of your lips. And notice if there's anything going on in the mind. Perhaps the mind thinks this is silly, or it's a waste of time. That's okay. Notice whatever's arising. Thinking, planning, fantasizing. In this moment, see if you can return your attention to your breath. And really inhabiting the fullness of this breath that's entering your body, this breath that's leaving your body. This breath that's been your longest living companion. Just really appreciating it for the next few seconds. Really savoring each and every moment with this special companion. And then after your next exhale, you can bring your chin to your chest, stretching the back of your neck. And if your eyes were closed, you can bring your eyes to a gentle open and come back to the room.
Thank you, Anu. Appreciate that. Okay. So we're going to do a series of questions. I'm going to start maybe with Anu for a moment. We'll come around this way, and we'll change orders after each question. So I want us to start by just having you each briefly share what your organization is trying to do. What's the change you're trying to bring about, and what's your passion?
So for me, I'm the founder of Bmore America, and basically what we want to do is live in a world without racial or gender bias, particularly unconscious bias. And what we do is we target companies. So we're really building a B2B business that's targeting healthcare system, law firms, law enforcement, government, big Fortune 500 companies, and helping them adopt science-based tools that have proven to measurably reduce bias. And a lot of these tools are rooted in mindfulness. And for me, my passion is breaking bias. I feel that unconscious bias is the root cause of a lot of challenges we face around inclusion, around diversity, around equity in our society. Most people don't wake up wanting to create inequity or provide biased care to their patients, but it's happening. We have over 50 years of evidence around it. And it's also really expensive. It costs our economy $2 trillion every year. So there's just wasted potential amongst all of us, but because of the way we look, because of the ways our bodies are formed, because of gender, we're unable to really tap into that talent. So we want to do that, and we want to do that using technology and studying behavioral science and really kind of helping people come together to really connect people in the workforce.
Hi, everyone. I'm really passionate about a world without slavery, where everyone can live up to their full potential. And the reality of slavery became real to me on a microfinance fellowship, where I spent 10 weeks living in Cambodia through a fellowship at NYU. And I met very desperate people, families that were selling their children in Cambodia, a father who offered my colleague his youngest daughter. And so at that moment in 2007 is when I realized, I need to do something, and started taking action towards that. So my organization, we, in essence, are a workforce development agency. We have a fashion school and incubator, serving 45 different anti-trafficking organizations, most importantly women, providing them with fashion skills, technical skills to design clothing. And we partner with brands like Sephora, Patagonia, Gap, as well as Fossil, and leading field trips and mentorship opportunities for our students. And then in India, we have 8 training sites in the poorest states of India, northern India, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal, where we focus on trafficking hotspot areas where children as young as 5 years old, girls are trafficked, boys are forced to work in brick kilns with no pay, generations are in bondage. And so we work in these hotspot areas with the goal of decreasing forced and child labor in our generation and eradicating slavery as a whole. I know it's very audacious, but we're measuring it, so I'm sure I'll get to talk about that later.
Hi everyone, I'm Monisha Raja, founder and creative director of Love is Mighty, which is a sustainable and cruelty-free footwear and accessories brand. And I work with tribal communities, marginalized communities in India currently, and mostly weavers and embroiderers in remote regions. And the idea of Love is Mighty is to be more inclusive of these communities, to bring more training, more self-sufficiency to women weavers and craftspeople. And I've been working in the fashion industry in New York City, so what I'm doing is bringing the luxury brand aesthetic to ancient mastery, kind of bridging the two worlds, and that's been my work for the past 8 years.
Monisha, let me tell you, she represents. Did you check out those shoes? She's representing. My name is Clayton Banks. I'm the CEO of Silicon Harlem. I go left when everybody's going right. I'll talk about more of that later, but let me say to you that it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank the New School for inviting me. I want to thank Mary Watson. I want to thank Michelle, even Nicole, who's been just like a sunshine for me. So I'm excited to be here, and most importantly, all of you who took the time out to come out here. I am focused on one thing, and if you can remember this statistic, almost 50% of people in Upper Manhattan, I'm going to take my time, 50% of people in Upper Manhattan do not have broadband in the home.
Okay, well, we're gonna come back to that.
I should just drop the mic and leave. But I'm going to stay for a moment.
So what I'd like to do is we're going to come back to your organizations and exactly what you're doing and how. But I want to just still ask you a little bit more, like, how and why did you start the organizations you're working on? Like, why did you choose to start these organizations as opposed to other directions you could have taken, and in terms of making the change that you wanted to bring about? So, Diane, I'm going to ask you.
Well, I didn't, grow up wanting to start an organization. Actually, in fact, I was in business consulting right out of NYU and just became really passionate, started volunteering. And the following summer, I went back and met with like 12 anti-trafficking organizations working in Cambodia. That's where I also met the girl Nomi, who I named the organization after. And Nomi really touched my heart. She was 8 years old. She was sold by her stepfather, and her mother allowed it to happen, sadly. And so she ended up at this shelter and still lives there today, long-term unit. So my co-founders and I really thought, her past doesn't dictate her future, and we wanted girls like her to have a chance, have an opportunity. So we just started volunteering, and from that, working in the fashion world. My co-founder was a buyer for Saks Fifth Avenue. She was a designer. So naturally, we started refining some of the products these nonprofit social entrepreneurs were creating. And then from that, we were able to secure a large order from Walmart.com. This was in 2011 when we were still a volunteer network. So then we were like, well, we're doing this as volunteers, unpaid, and now we're reaching a point where there's a demand for our services from other nonprofits in Cambodia and different social enterprises. So we applied for a grant through the State Department and, miraculously got it in late 2011. So that led us on a trajectory of not just growing our fashion school and incubator operation in Cambodia, but also starting our first program in Bihar, which is the poorest state of India, systemic violence against women. I lived there for 3 months. It was unsafe for me to leave my little compound past 6 p.m. without fear of being, harassed. So I think for me, it was very organic. And now, enlisting people from living presidents to corporations, I've become a champion because I've met the women, I've met the girls. And so that's why the organization exists. And my hope is that the organization will not exist in 10 years, actually. I do hope we'll make a tangible dent in measuring the reduction of human trafficking, and then take it and make it open source so other people can take our model and replicate it. My goal is not to see Nomi be a 50-year legacy organization with a $50 million budget, whatever it is. That's not the purpose. So that's my philosophy.
That might be one of the best things I've ever heard. Seriously, when you start a nonprofit, the reason you start is because you're trying to solve a problem. And what happens with many of our nonprofits in this country is go look for the next accident. And for someone to sit up here and say, my life is in this business, and the goal is to go out of business, is exactly correct. I support that 100%.
And Clayton, let's talk.
I am on fire, so let me keep going.
So
Hard to follow that, but let me say, for me, my father was a 30-year Marine, and he never went into corporate. He was an entrepreneur. My older brothers, none of them made any money, unfortunately, but so I went the corporate route. But the gene of entrepreneurialism was in me the whole entire time. When I worked for Showtime, which I thought I would be there forever, I loved it. I love movies. I love Showtime. But inside of me, I kept thinking, I'm going to bounce out at some point. But I wanted to learn on their dime. I got an opportunity to create a startup with a group of guys that we had $30 million. So that's not really a startup. It's like, you're ready to go. So we had the nice offices and furniture and all this other stuff. It was called Sega Channel. I love video games. So I'm in this next career and I'm going, wow, I'm never going to leave. This is going to be the best thing in the world. And the internet came along and sort of destroyed our whole vision. But I found myself at at Comedy Central and launched South Park. And I thought I'd be at Comedy Central forever. It was just a blast. Helped to hire Jon Stewart. I was involved in all these things. Made a whole lot of money in my corporate career. And what I realized is if I've had this much access and exposure, I work for President Clinton. I've done a lot of great things all over the world. Don't need any more pats on the back. I sit in the presidential library. I'm in the Library of Congress. Got a lot of cool things that happen in my life. A lot of it is because of access and exposure. I'm not that much smarter than anybody else. I'm actually very smart, but I'm not that smarter than anybody else. But access and exposure, see, Clinton used to say, and I say it too, intelligence is distributed everywhere evenly, but access and exposure is not. So I decided at some point in my career, Michele, that I would take all the access and exposure I've been fortunate to have and see if I can't pour it into an entire community. And for me, living in Harlem, Upper Manhattan became that for me. And so the only way I could see it happening is the entrepreneurialism route. I would have to create a company, and by the way, as you heard me say, I made a lot of money over the career, so I'm not a nonprofit thinker. I'm much more of a for-profit thinker. But I realize you can make money and do good. And all those companies I worked with, they weren't really that concerned about doing good. We were all about capitalism. I'm now in that mindset of, yes, I like making money, but I love changing lives. And so what I've been able to do is pour my access and exposure into a community, digital literacy, access to broadband, senior citizens to adolescents, and watch it literally happen. 3 years ago, I had a meeting just like this with all senior citizens talking about demystifying technology. This year, I did the same thing, and they were telling me, oh, yeah, I was using my cell phone, Clayton, and I walked into a store, and there was something that popped up on my... That's digital literacy. They know what's happening. When I did it the first time, they were like, why does somebody like me on Facebook? You know, so it's like a whole way of moving a community forward. So what? So that it never has to trail or be behind. In fact, it can keep up, if not lead, in technology and innovation. And that's what my life is now. I'm at that age now where I can say something like this. That's what the rest of my life is dedicated to, is to make sure that people have access and exposure. That's all you have to do. People can make it happen. But access and exposure is what got me into entrepreneurialism.
Thank you. So we're going to continue hearing maybe Anu and then Monisha on sort of your journey and how did you get here today?
Yeah, I mean, this was so powerful. I think for us too, like I founded Bmore to run out of business. Like, we have a goal. I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I have a lot more passions, but I feel like bias in particular has really meant a lot to me in my life, and I see its implications on our world. So I'll give a quick story as to why I started this. I came here as an immigrant when I was 10 years old, super lucky in New York City. Both my parents are doctors, but was always exposed to a lot of bias, like from a very young age, called a whole lot of slurs. So there was an idea where I would just hold myself back. I wouldn't share my name. I went by Andy for a very long time. I wouldn't speak the languages I spoke, the songs I sang. My culture was just in the closet for a very long time. And I saw that having a lot of impact on me. So, but with that said, I had access to college education. I went to NYU, not too far from here, studied international relations, and literally just committed myself to doing social change work, international human rights work, economic development work, mostly abroad. So here I was told I'm not American all my life. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm Indian, so let's do that. Went to India, realized I'm not really Indian because they think I'm American. So again, identity crisis. So, but then with that said, I really founded my first nonprofit working in Myanmar in 2006, wanting to do, again, ethnic reconciliation work, gender justice work. I was obsessed with, really wanting to go for, wanting to help people that are at the bottom of the pyramid. That took me to wanting to pursue more work in economic development. So I got my graduate work there. So my work was really around like, what can we do in terms of creating solutions? Creating solutions. Somehow I ended up in law school. And it was in law school where I really saw the implications of both gender bias and racial bias. So one incident that really speaks to me is when I was working in New Orleans in the court system, and I literally saw, it was a big court, working for the court, just black boys, little black boys, probably 14, 15 years old, being recycled through the court system, being sentenced 4 years, 5 years, 6 years into prison for trespassing to property, breaking cell phones. And there I'm like sighing. I'm literally sitting there in the court sighing. I'm like, how could this be? This is ridiculous. And the security person had to come to me and be like, you have to leave the room because you're being offensive. But I was just so flabbergasted. Here I am in law school learning about constitutional law and these aspirational values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people, but we're not talking about what's actually happening in frontline communities and the way our system is structured and rigged to not see the humanity of these individuals. And what really caught me was the amount of cruelty, in the eyes of the judges, the prosecutors, the security guards, many of whom themselves were of color, but towards these individuals. What is that about? Now, as a lawyer, I knew in studying the law that nothing in the law says you have to mistreat black people or immigrants or Muslims or whomever, whatever the identity may be. But there's mindsets. There's a massive challenge around people's mindsets and inherent beliefs. So for me, like the next frontier of social justice, social change, is shifting people's mindsets. The civil rights movement did an amazing job in terms of changing the laws. They delivered on their promise. Their promise was end Jim Crow. As a result, we passed the 1965 Immigration Act, which is why my parents and Asian Americans and Latin Americans and people from all over the world could immigrate here. Because before that, you had to be white in order to be a citizen of this country. Like you weren't permitted. Like this is this kind of stuff that people didn't know. So, but at this time, there are a whole host of other conditioning, stereotyping that's really part of our brains. We've been infected with it. So no one is consciously going to say that, oh, I dislike this person, but we feel it. There's a fear. So for me, when I saw that, what I felt in my belly was worse than when I worked in Myanmar, which was then the second most autocratic country in the world, where I was being followed everywhere by informants of the government, where I was working in really difficult situations. I'd been to North Korea because I worked in Korea after college for a while. But still, for me, it was like, wow, like I love this country, I love these values, yet we're not living up to these values. And for me also, when we talk about issues of racial bias, gender bias, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt. People are constantly walking on eggshells. And for me, I'm like, let's just talk about it. What's the big deal? I might make a mistake, you might make a mistake, but we need to talk about these things to solve them. And for me, as someone who's a total nerd, and I'm a nerd, but proudly so, I also saw that, whenever I would have a question, I would just go to the literature. I would go to the academics. I'm like, they've actually identified, what is causing these problems and what are solutions to these problems. So I was like, well, if we've kind of reached a stage where we're like past the information age, because everything you ever wanted to know about anything around injustice has been studied. Think about you guys, all of you, right? You're here at this esteemed institution studying something. And whatever you study, the thesis you write, the dissertations you write is going to go somewhere in some. But there's thousands, potentially millions of you that have done this over the last 50 years because they share that passion. But that's just collecting dust. What use is that? So for us, for me, I realized that I have to apply this work. And we really have to go to people, not just frontline communities, because there's a lot of work happening there, but people like me, overeducated, filled with degrees, but who also exercise a lot of authority, a lot of influence, a lot of decision-making, what is known as cerebrally power, a lot of people with power. But it's not just some remote, distant person sitting in the White House, it's all of us. In our jobs, in our day-to-day jobs, making decisions, those micro decisions that end up deciding who gets recruited, who gets retained, who gets advanced. Why do we have these disparities with respect to the gender wage gap, the racial gap? It's all of these are the micro decisions that are happening over and over again. And that's what we need to hack. And the cool thing is we can hack it, we can transform it, the tools are out there, but this needs to be a cultural shift. And for me, we need to end this within our lifetime. I don't want my kids to go through it. I don't want my grandkids to go through it. It's a waste of time. And I feel like what's happening in our world right now with Time's Up, with Me Too, with Black Lives Matter is really reassuring for us to move in that direction. So.
Wow. I'm so inspired hearing everyone on this panel, and I was wondering, did Michele make a mistake having me up here?
I don't know.
and because for me, it was not a very conscious decision where I'm at today. It's something that has unfolded on my journey in fashion. I was born and raised in India, and in a army family. My dad was in the army, and we moved almost every year all over India, so it was pretty nomadic childhood. So I think I really connected with the different cultures. I mean, India is so diverse, hundreds of languages, different traditions and crafts, and I was exposed to a lot of rural areas as well. And I came to New York when I was 20 to go to Parsons. I went to the BFA fashion program and graduated from there, and sort of my journey unfolded, and I was working in the fashion industry and ended up 8 years when I was thinking about starting this business. It was more like 10 years ago. I was working at Tory Burch and working on the footwear line. And I noticed there was nothing there I could wear because I'm vegan. I don't wear any leather. I don't wear any animal products. And I didn't really connect so much to the line that I was designing. And I told my creative director, I said, hey, did you know there are like something like 57 million vegans? There's a whole market out there that Tory Burch can, serve, and maybe we should start a vegan line. And she laughed at me and she said, well, Monisha, why don't you do it? And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. Thank you. Maybe I will think about that. So I packed up and left with no money, no resources, went to India and started looking for a footwear factory. I'm like, I'm going to start a vegan shoe line. And it wasn't planned, and then I ended up in these rural tribal communities way out in the desert, close to the border of Pakistan, off the grid. There are like 50, or maybe the whole place had about 50 adobe huts, and I just was, I think, just enamored by the intricate handcrafts that I was exposed to, that I saw, and it was such a barren landscape, and in contrast to that, the color, and I learned that there are 84.5 million tribals living in India, and the economic growth that's taking place, the rapid growth that's taking place in India, is happening in the IT sector. And that's only, that's in the urban area, and that's only 12% of where the Indian population lives. 88% live in rural India, and the poverty, the rural poverty is rampant. And as I started seeing the work of these artisans, and I was thinking, this is just incredibly beautiful, but there's nobody who's really working with them. What's happening is that they're working with middlemen who come in and exploit them, and their work ends up in cheap little markets. And I started seeing that there could be, that I could do a lot with my experience in fashion here in New York, and a Western aesthetic, bringing that element and making their work more relevant to a global market. And so I started working on that. So I was still traveling for a few months in India, and then I came back, and my friend who worked at Tory Burch at the time, I don't know if he's here, he may be in the room, he said to me, Monisha, what are you doing here? You need to go back and make a line of shoes. I'm so grateful to him because I was terrified. I had no idea how to start a business. I was completely right-brained individual, designing with this fantasy that I'm going to have my own fashion business. I think everyone who graduates from Parsons has that. And I was in a cloud about what that means. And having worked on my business now for 8 years, had I known what it takes to build a business, I would never have started it. But I'm kind of glad ignorance is bliss to a certain level for me, and I went back and I started working with the artisans who I didn't plan initially. I just wanted to do a vegan footwear line, and then I started working with the artisans, and I said, how could I combine my love of craft and handwork with shoes that are and my love of animals, and not make any products using leather. So I felt that the biggest impact that I could make was in this area of footwear, because I was in apparel before, and I still love apparel a lot. I still design that. But it seems like not using leather is where I would make the biggest impact, and that's how I started working on my business. And I think, that's about it. I think it's just sort of organically unfolded, and I wasn't sitting here, I was never in a frame of mind going, I need to save someone. And I just wanted to create beautiful fashion and not use animals, and dignify all the artisans, everyone involved in every step of the way.
Thank you. So Clayton, thank you, everybody. And now we're going to ask Clayton to sort of dig deeper. We're going to talk a little bit about the how. How are we going to achieve the ambitious goals that I know you have? So tell me a little bit about kind of what is the world you're envisioning in your area of work. What are the challenges that you're trying to overcome, and how?
It's clear to me that we're going into a really great window, and all of you in this room have a great responsibility, in my opinion, which is what I call infrastructure for equity. When we start thinking about the infrastructure of our country, in the past, streets and bridges and things of that nature oftentimes have created divides. And industrial revolutions don't come around that often. Your generation is about to embark on that. My generation did some really cool stuff. We brought you the internet. We got your cell phones. We did some really cool stuff. And my voice still matters, but I'm saying to you that your generation primarily has one of the greatest opportunities in the history of the world, which is to ensure that the next infrastructure upgrade, what I call World 4.0, will be infrastructure for equity. Some of us know, if you read history, the great urban cities in this country are divided by streets and bridges. Unintentional problems. Those who design infrastructure have, in the past, have primarily been men with great degrees, men that grow up, great degrees in the suburbs, the grass in the garage and the car. That's our prism. I grew up that way. That's our prism. So when we design something, we think about that. You think about this country. When there was a time, some of us remember, when there were no mini wraps or those cutouts in sidewalks. You know what I'm talking about? There was a point in this country where none of that was happening. And people in wheelchairs were going, hey, wait a minute. I can't get up and down the curb. And for 20 years, lobbying Congress to get laws in place so that sidewalks would have those ramps, those cutouts. Well, who did it benefit? It certainly made them more mobile and not have to worry about somebody coming behind them and helping them get up a curb. They can now navigate the streets. But what happens if you're pulling your luggage when you're traveling? The first thing you look for is a cutout. You're pushing a stroller, cutout. You're on a walker, a cutout, and guys like me, I'm looking for a cutout just to walk across the street. So the point I'm making, though, who's on social media right now? Because I'm going to say something you can tweet. Here's what I would say, and I'm going to try to get back to your question. So here's the deal. When you hear the example I just gave you, here's the point. It's not a zero-sum game. All right? And here's the tweet. If we do the best and the right thing for the least of us, it benefits all of us. Some of you may need me to say it again. If we do our best, if we do the right thing for the least of us, it benefits all of us. And I got a ton of examples of it, but I just gave you one. And the reason why I'm saying that is because everything I do and everything my company is focused on is we want to make sure that anything, listen, and one day we should have the new school create a debate. Let's have a debate about racism. Let's have a debate about unconscious bias. Let's have a debate about all that stuff, because I'm coming, like I told you at the beginning, when everyone's going right, I'm going left. To me, that's somewhat of a definition of both innovation and entrepreneurialism, right? When everyone's going right, I'm going left. And when you go left and you talk about 1965, Voting Rights Acts, and these things, what we often have to say is those who stood up and said, you know what? I no longer want to have the same things in place. If you're going to put these rules on me to suppress my vote, I don't buy it. At one point we did. We're like, we're just going to complain and bitch about it all night long. But when you disrupt that and say no longer, what happens? You get your ass kicked. You get beat up. You get dog sicked on you. You get hung, maybe even you're killed. So if you're ready to disrupt, you got to be ready to get your butt kicked. I'm one of those cats who's ready. So that's why I want to have a debate at some point about these issues, because forgive me for standing up, but you know.
We'll bring you back for that.
My last point is this. You have a great opportunity. We collectively have a great opportunity to ensure that the infrastructure that has to be done, everyone will be connected. Everyone will be connected very soon in the whole world. And everything will be connected. Walls and ceilings and streets and poles, and everything will be listening and getting smarter and helping us as human beings to live better and efficient lives. Some would say maybe it's negative. I'm trying to look at that as a positive. But the truth is it's going to happen. In most cases, it's already happening. So you're looking at everyone being connected and everything being connected. What type of infrastructure are we going to put in place to ensure everyone has a shot? That's your greatest challenge.
And just, Clayton, and the way you're doing that, I know there are many things you're doing, but in terms of the broadband piece and the...
Well, you know, I worked in the cable industry for many years, and what we were very clear about is we spent so much money on the infrastructure of this country. When you look at the connectivity today, it's largely based on the cable companies spending almost $1 trillion on digging ditches and pulling cable and climbing poles and all that kind of stuff. And the first thing we did was, let's go to rich places because we need to make our money back. So what happens is your poor neighborhoods have to trail behind. We didn't put the infrastructure in many of these communities because they just weren't going to pay the kind of prices we needed to get paid. So Silicon Harlem has decided to flip the script. Back in those days, we used to call it cherry picking or redlining. Now you hear digital divide. So Silicon Harlem has decided to flip that script. We've decided, hey, what if we cherry pick poor people? What if we built an infrastructure, a broadband solution that could be affordable? And we go after those poor communities and let them pay $30 to $40 for the same package they would get for $150 to $200 with these incumbents. What if we can create that? And what we found out is that the amount of money that was spent back in the 80s, we can now launch the same service for 1% of the cost. Wireless is stronger than ever now. All types of new technology is available now. Cities are much more interested in this than ever before, and the consumers are getting smarter. The only impediment in most cases is price. So for us to come out with a lower price, an affordable price, is a no-brainer. And I think rich people will say, oh, I can get it for cheaper? Let's call Silicon Harlem. So instead of trickle down, what is it? Trickle up.
Great, thank you. So, Diana.
That's a tweet, by the way. That's a tweet.
Yeah. Diana, I wonder if you could also kind of, I want to sort of spend a little time more on the model that you're using and how you are bringing opportunity and hope into the lives of the women you're working with, the actual way in which you're doing it. You mentioned it briefly, but a little bit more detail in both Cambodia and India.
Yeah, for purpose of time, I'll probably just focus on India. It's the more difficult to serve population. So women that we serve in northern India and other rural parts, they 90% are illiterate, have major barriers to work, 80% have been abused by family members, and 25% are survivors of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, intergenerational prostitution. So I've been learning, we are partnering with Vodafone and UBS to build a training app. So I've been working on the app and going through the design thinking process of learning what is it like to be in the day in a life of a woman in rural India. It's a really hard life. You know, we've been working there since 2012, and I lived there, my co-founder lived there for 2 years, and we thought we knew their life struggle, but it wasn't until we really were pulling out some of kind of their day-to-day. I mean, they get up at 4:30 a.m., go in groups to use a field, use a restroom because they don't have toilets. Then their day starts like rapid speed chores, gathering wood. The time it takes for them to provide for their household is probably really 80% of their day. So at what point do they come to our training? At what point are they able to secure their first job? At what point are they able to learn how to read or write, right? So addressing those barriers is what we've been really effective at doing. And this year, between both programs, we're serving 5,100 women. And that's not counting the children, because research shows that when women are employed and have income, they're 70% more, actually, not 70%, they invest 70 cents out of the dollar. These are for communities like Bihar, whereas men sadly invest 30 cents. And alcoholism is so rampant in Bihar, where the government of Bihar has instituted alcohol ban. So if you have alcohol, it's illegal. You could be arrested. So that's how bad it is there, and those are the circumstances that we work. And so it's really important, in terms of the women getting their first job. I've seen tremendous growth just in terms of having a paycheck, having savings, having the ability to send their daughters to school, and cutting the generational cycle of slavery off.
Thanks a lot, Diana. Anu, it would be really helpful if you could share sort of how do you do the work of addressing racial and gender bias?
Absolutely. So basically, what I did in the last 10 years, 12 years, through all the studies, was really kind of go into the science of what is bias, particularly unconscious bias, how it operates in the brain, how it operates in the nervous system, and then its implications and the different types of decision one is making. So what we're doing now is, in the last 4 years, we started 4.5 years ago in 2014, we developed a methodology to break bias, which is called PRISM. And PRISM are 5 tools that have each been shown to reduce and hack bias. It stands for perspective taking, pro-social behaviors, individuation, stereotype replacement, and mindfulness. And basically they're rooted in mindfulness, and it's all about making people aware of what's happening here and here in their bodies when they're interacting with people, and really giving them new habit patterns. The whole idea is we break the habit of bias. So for example, I'm going to say a bunch of words. Think of the first image that comes to your mind when you hear this word. Teacher, surgeon, actor, model, professor. Just examples, right? And notice the gender identity of these people, the racial identity of these people, the age of these people. It's going to be different for different people, but it becomes boxed in, right? So here I am with a Latinx woman, for example. but I don't know if she's an engineer. I don't know if she's a professor, but the ideas in my mind are going to impact how I'm interacting with her. So we've created these programs. Right now, it's for the last 4 years, it's been very much in person and online work. So hacking racial bias, hacking gender bias. There are, hour-longs to half-day to full-day training programs. But the journey that we've created is there's a journey to breaking bias. Learn, practice, propel. So currently, most of our offerings are at the learn stage, where we're really creating a shared understanding of concepts. What is bias? Where does it come from? The who, what, where, when, and how of it, and its manifestations, and learning about PRISM. And then we want to move people to practice. So can we practice these PRISM tools on a daily basis and track shifts in behavior, shifts in decisions, cost savings, for companies? So we're a B2B business and really wanting to bring them on to then propel, which is the third stage, where we can begin to see how we're really unleashing the full potential of companies. So our goal is to really create a certification program of Bmore certified companies. And it's also a network that consumers can chime into. Like, I'm only going to buy from companies that are Bmore certified because they're committed to breaking unconscious racial and gender bias within their companies, but also in the world. And that way we can begin to be part of like-minded communities and not feel guilty about going to fashion brands or going to any sort of vendors or providers or supermarkets or universities where our internal values aren't aligned. One thing I want to say is, like, some of the ways this happens is exactly what Diana and Clayton have shared. So think about broadband. There were so many biases that the people that created this infrastructure had with respect to where, think about it. Why is it that we don't have any subways that connect Queens to the Bronx to Brooklyn? Why is it everything goes to the Wall Street, right? And we see that in lived environments. Why? Because there are unconscious biases and conscious biases amongst decision makers about the humanity of people that live in these communities. We live in a hyper-segregated country. 2/3 of Americans, 2/3, 2 in 3, have to physically move neighborhoods for us to be fully integrated. This is 65 years after Brown v. Board. What's going on? Right? It's because there are these ideas that need to be broken at the policy level too. Same thing, with respect to any other industry. So our goal is to really track that. So our next step really is, so far we've been working with health systems, so Maimonides Hospital, University of North Texas, really beginning to create that shared vocabulary. Worked with big companies like IBM, we're working with PBS, but really at the learn stage. But our goal next year is to really take our programs to mobile and then test the efficacy of the methodology to actually show a measurable reduction in bias, which we can measure, shift in beliefs, and then shifts in behavior. So it's really about behavior change. And for me and for my team, it's really about also addressing the internalized aspect of unconscious bias. How the stereotypes about us, whether we're depending on our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our racial or ethnic background, whatever that may be, limits us from unleashing our full potential, right? It's because we succumb to what other people think about us. And that's my life story. So I had to really break bias for myself, and even now every day I'm like, oh my God, why am I thinking this? And why can't I do this, right? But I had a whole journey around, can I be a leader? Can I be an entrepreneur? Am I an entrepreneur? Because I didn't see very many leaders like me who cared about the things I care about being in those positions. At the end of the day, it's really, again, thinking about human behavior. But we really want to do that. So we can create a world that's more joyful and fun too. Like, this may be a heavy topic, but we really need to have fun because we only have one life to live. So really kind of balancing all those things out.
Thank you. So, yeah. So, Monisha, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the how of your work. And I want to focus on some of the things that we discussed before around, how do you create a more fair trade? How do you make sure that that the artisans you're working with actually benefit and reach the market? What are the sort of things you're doing to try to make that happen?
Like I had mentioned earlier, there are a lot of middlemen, contractors, subcontractors who come in, and because the artisans are disadvantaged in a way that they are geographically isolated, it's hard to bring raw materials to them. They don't have access to transportation, so these contractors can come in, and it's easier for them to give up to 70% of their crafts and their work to them at a very cheap price. So I think my role, as I've started working in these communities, when I started in 2011, I started working with some women weavers. There are 2 weavers in this village, only 2 women who are weaving. Weaving is mostly a man's job, and they take a lot of pride in it, and women aren't really included in that process. And so there were 2 looms that were at this facility that they were coming to and weaving. And now, and I know it's very slow, I don't have these huge numbers, but there are 25 women weavers now, and the looms are built at their home. So they can care for their families, their children, without having to leave. And it's really part of the slow fashion movement, and I've come to embrace that. I used to try to force the artisans, and I also work with male weavers as well. I used to try to force them to meet New York fashion calendars. No way. That's not happening. And so I had to see that the slow pace of their work was part of the strength of my brand, that I had to somehow, I had to sit back and embrace that and not fight it. And so for me, it's going back to India, going back and working with them, bringing the raw materials to them, and then the work that they do, and a lot of the weavers that I work with, we work with recycled plastics. So that's the innovative part of what I'm bringing in, something new, and these are traditional weavers, generations have been weaving. And so my shoes, for instance, they're completely woven from biscuit wrappers, so they're recycled and using sustainable wood. And I was working with a factory in India, so there was a lot of moving parts to it. So I'm still working on my business, trying to make this viable and scalable. So I'm not there yet that I can say, yes, this is scalable, and that's where I'm at. But the 8 years, it's been quite a journey of me getting to know the artisans, getting to know their challenges, which are enormous. Some of them are settled farmers, and they have agricultural lands, and some of them are semi-nomadic, and I do work with a group of semi-nomadic goat herders. So I can't really chase them all over the desert, try to figure it out. So I work with a collective that does that, and it is a challenging part of it. And 30% of the time for these artisans are spent in embroidering and doing craft, while the rest of the time they're involved in subsistence economy, really for their basic needs, farming, herding cattle, all of that.
And Monisha, just I'm going to transition to another question to everyone, which is a little bit about the issue of scaling, right? And what does scale mean? Like, what's the relevant scale that you want to achieve to achieve whatever both your social impact and financial goals? And how is the market presenting itself to you? Both in terms of challenges, but as well as opportunities in terms of trying to lift this.
Yeah. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, and then we'll go to Diana.
Yeah. So that's so I find myself at a pivotal point right now around those questions, because I focus so much on the design, building the relationship with the artisans, and they're very shy, they're very private. So repeated travel back and forth, working with them, they start to trust me, and I start to work with, and so that's been really even seeing if that's even possible for me to be working and not even speaking the same language, even though I'm Indian. I do speak. I can understand them slightly, but there's not even a word in the Indian language for deadlines. So I've got to be there trying to communicate the urgency of how we need to get some things done. And what was, sorry, just totally lost my train of thought. Scaling, yes. So now I'm focused more on the infrastructure of my company and the business part of it, because I've had investors approach me along the way, interested in investing in my brand, loving the story, the value-driven model that it is, but I'm finding that they're still looking at, how much is this going to generate? They want to invest about $1 million, want to get 20 million in like 2 years and 3 years. And that is not really realistic for my business model. I think that it's going to be a gradual growth. And I need to work with investors who understand that and who are impact-driven and not entirely profit-driven, but I also need to be realistic in knowing that. Yes, I can be idealistic about these things, but at the end of the day, if the business doesn't make money, it's not a business. It's just a hobby.
Thank you.
I know that's right.
So I'm going to ask all of you to think about this question about scale. And scale, there is no one answer to what's the scale you want to achieve, and then what's the pathway to it. And scale, the question I'd like to really focus on is the scaling of impact, not necessarily the scaling of your organization. For example, Diana, I think you mentioned earlier, like really demonstrating in Cambodia and India a way of doing things that might influence others. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about what you think scale is for your organization and how you want to get there, and who are the partners and allies you need to get there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I even thought about scale, I thought about, what is our theory of change? Because that's, in essence, the benchmark we're measuring ourselves against. For example, our theory of change is that if you focus on hotspot areas, train women particularly that are vulnerable or survivors, over time they will advance, over time they'll earn income, over time they'll save money, over time they'll invest in their children, over time you'll reduce the cycle of slavery. And so we've measured that through working with the university, we measure that through the Asian Development Bank that went to visit our fashion school in Cambodia. So it's working, and now the question is what resources we have to deploy and to serve. I'm not saying we're going to serve 46 million people, because there are 46 million people in slavery today, according to the United Nations and other scholars. And so with that, what is it we're trying to achieve? We're trying to measure the reduction. So our goal is to train and empower 100,000 women in the next 5 years. And so we have a roadmap for that. And we realize that, any organization that's serving such a high touch population, particularly women that are survivors or vulnerable, they require a lot of support. And so we can provide the training, but we need other stakeholders to provide them with legal services, medical care, housing. And so we've worked very holistically to identify those partners. So it's really a step-by-step process, mapping out, what ultimately the impact we're trying to see is women that are self-sufficient. What are the barriers that are preventing them from getting there? Can we as an organization sustainably serve those needs as well? Or should we focus on our core competency? And we've been very good at focusing on our core competency and really building partnerships with international organizations, governments, and the private sector. Now the private sector, to sustain our efforts, we've partnered with larger brands like Marriott for placement in India, placing women in jobs. We've partnered with other large employers as well as hospitals to provide entry-level positions, because we recognize we cannot create these jobs alone by selling our products, which we had traditionally back 8 years ago. We sold products to brands, and we still do that to a small degree. But besides scaling, it's the question sustainability. If we were to leave India, would our trainees still be self-sufficient? And I'm very proud to say that they are, which is a huge, from my co-founder and I, we didn't want to just train women. We wanted to make sure that they actually got the job, which is something that set us apart from other organizations at that time. So I think these are the questions that we ask ourselves. And in terms of selecting partners, it's alignment, it's values alignment. We have a whole criteria we developed with Bain Consultants as well, who surveyed did a 360 on our organization. And so that's the criteria that we use to screen partners, because it's really important that your partner also has the same vision of change that your organization sees, or your impact that you see, that your partner also is aligned.
I'm going to ask Clayton and then Anu to respond to the same question, and then we're nearing Q&A, so start thinking about that, and we'll open that up soon. So Clayton, the issue of scale, who your partners are, what your ambitions are, I know they're high.
I'm going to try to be brief because I know I'm very long-winded, which is probably impossible. But I'm actually very inspired by the this whole program, right? The Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative, ran by the great Elizabeth Werby. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for all of us to scale. Because the thread I'm hearing, even though I may be the oddball on this panel, but the thread I'm hearing is we care about people. And I would like to say that all of us in this room care about people in a way that we want to do something. Even if we're one of the people, right? We want to just do something. And so for me, when I look at scale, we started out our company with a meetup. I used to come downtown like I am here and in Brooklyn and area for meetups back in 2013. There were meetups all over the place downtown. Loved it. Zero uptown. So I told a couple of my friends, I said, listen, why don't we do a meetup in Harlem and just see if anybody would come. We were just hoping that 30 people would come. We'd be like, wow, that'd be phenomenal. Did our first meetup in February 2013, 500 people came. And that's when I knew I wasn't the only geek uptown. I was like, wait a minute, there's a pent-up ambition here. And when you bring that audience together, a lot of people start paying attention, the mayor and the council people and all these other people who you do need in your camp to scale. So we started doing these meetups, not formed as a company or anything, but under the banner of Silicon Harlem, month after month, and every meetup was packed. So finally we incorporated in 2014, and I was interviewed by NBC. The great Tracy Strahan interviewed us. And she said, what are you guys trying to achieve? We've been hearing a lot of stuff about Silicon Harlem, but we don't know what you guys, are trying to do. And we said, well, we're trying to scale. We would hope to see that there'll be a lot of meetups uptown, and we had no co-working spaces at this time. We said, we hope we get co-working spaces. We hope we'll have incubators and accelerators. We hope we can really, propel a startup community. I can report to you tonight, 4 years later, WeWork's in Harlem, 7 different co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators, and a robust startup community is in Upper Manhattan. That's how we've been scaling and trying to save lives and not help lives. And let me finally say, the other critical component was our kids, our students. At that time, very little STEM was being taught in the public schools of Harlem. Very little. District 5, almost zero. 27 schools in that district. So we set out to go, we talked to the Department of Education of New York City and said, why don't you let us put some after-school programs in place that will get these kids moving on, not just technology, but also science. See, people say STEM and you don't really know what they're talking about. I'm talking about we were teaching math, engineering, technology, and science. And we still do this very day, and it has scaled. We don't just work in Harlem anymore. We're in Queens. We're in Brooklyn. We're all over the city. Because there's nothing more important if we don't do anything else, but it's to prepare the future for those who are coming behind us. And that's the scaling we love, because you talked about impact. I could talk about the money, too, but I'm just going to stay with the impact. And it's made a difference.
I mean, that's so interesting because, my colleague is here actually, and this is something we're talking about all the time because we have a really strong proof of concept. In the last 4.5 years, we've trained over 10,000 people. We know this is working. We're talking to huge brands like Estee Lauder and others, and they're all like, wow, we really want this. So our theory of change, again, if you think about it, at the end of the goal, our end goal is really kind of remove the world of racial and gender bias, just that within our lifetime. We have a deadline, 2040. And, all the countries that were represented here, Cambodia, India, again, it's those same issues. It may not be around race, but it's certainly around gender. How do we value people's labor based on their gender identity? The science has shown there's actually no difference. We can argue it later, but actually the science is there's no difference with respect to competency, talents, and gifts based on gender identity and biological makeup of sex. But what are the cultural assumptions that are placed upon people who happen to be women and non-men, right? Let's just say that. So for us, it's really hacking that. So how do we work backwards? At this time, we know there's a strong market need for this. We know that we have a really solid proof of concept. And we started out working exclusively in the healthcare industry. In the last 4.5 years, we've worked with law enforcement, we've worked with lawyers, we've worked with nonprofits, philanthropy, big companies in tech and finance. So we're like, wow, this is actually something that could be scaled across industries. But our goal in the next 3 years is to really develop our mobile platform that can really educate people on the root causes of bias, how it comes about, and then beginning to practice these tools to demonstrate behavior change, like really build that bulletproof case. And alongside that, build a very strong train-the-trainer program, which we would then scale into different companies. So our goal isn't for me or my team members to be the experts. We want to make you all, the experts. So we transfer this knowledge because we feel like there are people that are working for organizations. They know their business best. They know how these challenges come up internal to their business. They just need the skills and tools to deal with it and really apply it to them. So that's what we want to do. So that's our goal in the next 3 years, is to really bring that out. And then the sky's the limit after that we really want to commercialize it. So at this point, what we're thinking about is different funding avenues for us to really build out this incredibly interactive, gamified mobile application, mobile learning community is what we're calling it, in order to really reach businesses, healthcare systems. And currently we have a really, really strong partner, a large health system in the Northeast. I can't disclose who, but top 5 who wants to work with us, and we'll be doing large randomized control trials to really show a measurable reduction in bias and improvement in behavior, as well as burnout, as well as addressing burnout, stress, depression, loneliness, and all sorts of other challenges that employees face currently in the workplace. We want to kind of hack all of that.
Can I just make one quick comment about what he said? I can't let this go over people's head. You said something within that monologue which was terrific, that is at the root of this. He said, we're all the same. Everybody catch that? Biologically, if you read anything on any great anthropologist, philosopher, I've read all this stuff. And if you really want to have success, you got to get to that root. Because racism is a learned behavior. You're not born with it. And if it's a learned behavior, it can be unlearned. And the way we've been too lazy is this social construct that's been built. We all agree to it. We can complain, something wrong, but until you disrupt the social construct, that's why I made the analogy with voting rights. You go through heck with it, but until you get to that root, which is somehow or another somebody said I'm different than you. And so when you call me a black man, what all do you assign to that? Because I grew up in a way that there was no way you would say in your own stereotypes that he's a black man. I grew up as a top surfer. My favorite band is the Rolling Stones. And it wasn't because I'm just like, it was because that's what I grew up with. So you got to get off of this thing that we're somehow so different. And I grew up where I go over to my friend's house and there's a pig roasting in the ground, and I said, cool. Today you guys are like, Instagram, oh my God. No, it was normal. You come to my house, my mom might be making something else, fried chicken or something, whatever. But we have this way of sort of all of a sudden figuring out the differences are evil, when in fact the differences should be celebrated.
Well, that's the beauty of this work, right? Is that, I love people and I love cultures, and I love just how amazingly diverse our world is and how human ingenuity, human creativity has really created culture.
I've been given
challenge
the
is-
same question everywhere in the world.
The challenge is the hierarchy.
Everywhere.
The hierarchy we then assign to people, right?
First thing they say to me when I go, I was in Japan, I was in Panama, I was in Cuba, everywhere. First thing people say to me after they go, who the hell is this big black guy, is, are you hungry? If I went to any of your homes right now, that would be one of the first questions. Anywhere you go, it tells me that humanity can be saved. It can be great. And it has to be focused on our human commonality and not our differences. I'm sorry.
So I want to turn it over to you, but I want to hold on to this moment also, because this is about leadership and leading with values. And at the heart, at the center of this, you have to get a good business model, you have to get funding, you have to get backers, you have to get partners, but you have to really lead with values. And so I think everyone on this panel has really shared that with us. So thank you so much. So we are now, I think there's some mics. Is someone helping to facilitate the questions in the room so we can hear people? Okay.
Walk up to a microphone. Yep. If you have a question.
Yeah, line up. Thank you. Back there, line up for questions, and we'll take one at a time. Over on this side then. Thank you. And if you could just say your name, and maybe if you're from the new school, where you are. If you're not, you can say wherever you're coming from. So.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. My name is Rich Agarwal. I'm a professor at Pratt, and I'm also a social entrepreneur. I've been running my social enterprise for the last 2 years. It's called Global Shokunin. So my question is for Anurag. Anurag, I'm wondering, how do you convince companies to buy into your, to buy your services? And what are some of the metrics that you track in order to convince the companies that this actually works? And also, you said you are in the first phase, which is the learning phase, and there's like 2 more phases. So is there really a proof of concept, and has your model shown to be effective?
All really great questions. First question is really, how do we convince companies? So this is quite easy. Every company after Civil Rights Act is obliged to do diversity and inclusion and equity work. So they have a D&I department. So they have to do this. And what's happened is in the last 20 years, 30 years, there's been so much D&I training, but they haven't been able to show results with respect to recruitment, retention, advancement, compensation. We see a whole host of challenges. So for us, that's the way we get in. We're like, hey, this is the training we're offering. For folks like doctors, they have to do continuing medical education credits. For lawyers, CLE credits. For social workers, CE credits around cultural competency, around diversity and inclusion. So for us, it's can we use that time that's already allocated within the profession, within the real estate of these people's curriculum, to then give them tools to hack bias. The follow-up to that was, can you remind me, sorry?
The metrics.
The metrics, yes. So part of it is that we're basically tracking what people's beliefs are pre-post. Currently, a lot of our work is at the learn stage. So we do in-person trainings, online trainings, really assessing where people are with respect to where they are, racial beliefs, gender beliefs, ideas around racial bias, and also taking the implicit association test. So we begin to know where they are. And then doing a post-test to really show what they've learned. And we have a whole host of assessments around that's rooted in some of the science, and some of our advisors have actually created these metrics, like the racial beliefs assessment, and then also around personal wellness. So that's really important to us. Longer term, what we want to do is actually begin to track shifts in assumptions. But we could do that with a mobile app where we can track analytics and see how they're interacting with the app and what kind of shifts they're having with respect to just intergroup dynamics. There's also a lot of ways we do some anecdotal data. We just ask oh, where are these challenges coming up for you? People write a lot. We did this, our first deployment last year with a large health system, and we had over 180 doctors go through that. And we literally got so much data that we can now see that, wow, these are the themes that are occurring for doctors with respect to patient care, with respect to dealing with their colleagues. So then we can begin to address those challenges to really iterate on what we're offering. Our hope is once the mobile app is really ready, we can integrate it within the existing HR systems and and within healthcare with electronic health records that really tracks, differentials with respect to quality of treatment that's given to patients of color, to women, and other, classes of individuals. With respect to your last question, is it really tested? So that's true. That's what we were trying to prove. What we've done is we've really culled together the evidence from across the discipline. So PRISM, each one of those tools has individually shown to reduce unconscious bias, but no one has actually tested bringing this training to individuals to practice these tools for 8 weeks at a time to track behavior change. So that's what we're wanting to do in the next 3 years. But everything we're saying is has footnotes, because we know that the critical mind, and particularly working with professionals, we know they're going to be well, I met this black dude and he was like this, and therefore all 33 million black people are like that person, right? So there's so much doubt around it, so we want to be able to really feed that mind.
Right. Thanks. Best of luck.
We're going to go on this side now.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in and ask people to be succinct so that we can, I see there's a lot of questions. There will be a reception, so we'll also have chance for discussion later.
Hello, my name is German. I have a small business for kitchen design and kitchen installations. My question is 3 questions. Basically, the first question is, when it comes to value alignment, what kind of values do you look for when you hire somebody? That's one. The second will be, do you train people first and then hire them? And the third one will be, what was the third one?
Those are great.
So far, I'll ask the third one after, if anything.
Yeah. So can I ask Diana maybe to respond to that?
Yeah. We have now 40 staff between India, Cambodia, and US. And I'll just start from the US. It's closest to me. And, as a startup nonprofit organization, you have very little to work with in the early stages. So we spend a lot of time training actually our interns. A lot of them we've hired to become staff. And train them so well that, 3 years later, they're being recruited by Random House Penguin. Our graphic designer, Janae, she just moved there because the private sector is more competitive. And we recognize that's one of the challenges of the social sector, right? And a nonprofit or a startup company, for example. But I really look for intrinsic motivation. I've talked to CEOs of companies and asking them the same question, what they look for. And across the board, I've come across intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is, within them, that they're so passionate about the mission. They're willing to go the long haul. They're willing to do what it takes. They're willing to work long hours if it requires. And that's something that, you can have the skill sets to do it, but if you're not coming to work, it's just something that I've noticed through Nomi Network being so mission focused and mission driven that's been the most critical, and that's really helped us actually even secure volunteers in the early years when it was 100% volunteer effort.
So here's how I'm going to thank you, Diana. That's hugely insightful and important, and the sector can learn a lot from that experience. I'm going to do a little bit of a managerial effort here to make sure that everybody gets to ask their question. So we're going to get one question, one answer. One question, one answer, and then if it gets a little bit, I know Sundar's helping me with the time, if it gets too long, I'm going to then say, everyone ask your questions, and each person gets to respond. So let's get a question over here. Thank you.
Maureen Reardon, independent artist, designer, entrepreneur in transition. Clayton, I'd like to ask you a question in terms of touch, in terms of our hands. That's equanimity, Do you think there's enough interest in where you are in balancing out what is being offered through the tech world through apprenticeships, which would be drawing on that local community to actually offer creating jobs for local people to bring their arts into the place?
I do. I totally believe there is, and if you spend any time in Upper Manhattan, specifically Harlem, it's one of the most creative places in the world. You're talking about jazz, you're talking about the Apollo, you're talking about artists, you're talking about street. Sometimes people make fun of the kids that are running down the streets in motorbikes and popping wheelies and everything like that. These people are actually engineers. They fix these machines, they buy the parts, they figure out how to make them hot and all this other stuff. Artists using their hands. We call it, in Silicon Harlem, we call it tech meets art, because we believe you cannot have a robust community unless the creative minds are side by side with the tech community. So you're hitting on the right thing. And what I have found out in our journey is that not everyone's going to be a coder. Hello? Not everyone's going to sit behind a computer and just code. There's people that we need to make the murals. We have a beautiful mural of Dizzy Gillespie on 135th Street, right across the street from a police station. I mean, 3 stories high. It's absolutely gorgeous. Didn't take a computer to do it. It took somebody to say, hey, I'll paint this for you. So we think that's a critical component, and we notice even with our kids in school, as much as we want them to go into these STEM careers, you can't hold somebody back that has that creative spirit in them. No matter how much money they may or may not make, they got to get it out of them. And we at Silicon Harlem want to foster that. Our conference coming up, everything we do. At our conference, we're actually having a jazz artist come, a young lady that's going to come and play the piano and guitar. That's all I got. But I did want to just say to that kid, I know you only got one answer, but I just want to say to you, listen, one thing you heard amongst this group, don't hire everyone that is just like you. Look for a difference, and then you train them. But you definitely want to get that diversity, harder, but a better outcome.
Yeah. Okay, over here. One question.
My name is Christina. I'm a recent Milano graduate and entrepreneur. My question is for Diana. I was curious, as you grew your company, what type of challenges you've overcome throughout that time?
Yeah, great question. So many. I mean, in India with staffing, we had our program manager initially that didn't want to live in rural India. He wanted to live and manage a program basically a state away. So initially we had to, in 2012, find a new program manager. Recruitment is very, very difficult there because I would say that it's difficult to secure individuals who are willing to live in such horrendous circumstances. And then now I would say, we get mafia threats. I mean, it's not easy. I'll just leave it at that, operating in India in a state that has really a lack of rule of law and high corruption. Now facing challenges of growth. I mean, we've grown significantly in the past few years and have kept development at a steady state. And so really finding the right people to grow the revenue of the organization is the next stage, and willing to adhere to the context of the nonprofit framework. There's a book that if you're interested in the social sector, you should read. It's called Uncharitable by Dan Pallotta. It talks about how the nonprofit sector is very much stifled from growth because of the framework and paradigm that was created during the, Puritans, in essence, who invented charity. So it's very backwards, and now currently, fast forward 2018, we're operating in the same context. So there's a lot of room for innovation. There's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of room for pushing, the norms of this sector, and that's what we've been trying to do as well.
Yeah. I'm going to now ask, and hopefully our next panel, not tonight, but in the future, will actually be trying to address that question of money and social impact, because I think it's really important. So I'm going to ask our folks on this side to just ask your questions, then we're going to have folks here ask their questions, and then you guys can each just take one, and we'll end, okay? Thank you.
My question is actually for Anurag, but this is in regards to what you've been doing. You mentioned that it's going to impact healthcare, and I'm actually kind of curious as to going forward with your application, how you will actually adjust when it comes to, for example, how we're going forward with digital media, and how digital media or any type forms of media have actually been affecting the mindset of our generation and generations prior and going forward, and how you will actually address that, like, for example, media, not just online, but also in television and movies, and impact our doctors and future doctors. And if you will actually address that in the app, like, for example, WebMD is a huge resource that affects individuals, but also in movies on how they display, for example, seizures, and how that actually could affect a doctor's decision making. And I just was curious how you will actually address that in the app, or if you actually will going forward.
Great. Thank you. That's a fascinating question. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, we're not going to answer yet. We're going to just take all the questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then you can decide what you can answer right now.
My question was really on your experience in change, impact, and your journey of influence. If you were not in the social entrepreneurship space, which is where I am not exactly, I'm on a leadership path, but within like a regulated environment, how would you tell yourself, who has probably left that world of corporate America or a government agency, for example, what advice would you give yourself as a leader to have the change and influence within that space?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Last question on this side, and then we'll go over here and get all the questions.
Hello. Thank you for taking my question. I'm Shonda Westbrook. I am an entrepreneur for, it seems like, forever. But quickly, I work with youth, young people in Harlem, and I have a question. Well, if you would address me. I'm coming up here because it's such a frustrating process being an entrepreneur. So I would like the panel to, just speak on the struggle of being solo, because I am a solo entrepreneur. It's hard for me to find like-minded people that I can network with, put on my team, have that same vision I do have for the young people coming up. And it's in the arts, it's in social justice. I work with a lot of politicians in Harlem, been given grants and things like that, but again, I'm doing everything, writing the grants, I'm setting up the events, I'm doing the program. So I just want like some advice on how did you guys deal with that, and then how did you not get burned out or frustrated or just want to just quit? Is it worth it? So if you guys could.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, on this side, and we're going to do the questions, and then the panelists can choose to respond to a aspect of what has been questioned.
Hello, my name is Damian Williams. I'm an entrepreneur, native of Harlem, and statement more than a question. I feel like the gentlemen are actually kind of moving in the right direction, and very similarly, ladies, thank you very much for your humane considerations, because it is of urgency that we push this world in the way that it's going. Clayton, you spoke to, humanitarian efforts, and I feel like in this current political landscape, we have a necessity to be proactive in moving in this direction. Are you hungry? Period. That, as a base consideration, should be something that is pushing the world forward. Anurag, with regard to bias, why just medicine? And we can finish the rest of this in the aftermath, but why just medicine when this is a global consideration? And Clayton spoke to, race as a socially constructed phenomenon. So, it is much as it affects all professions, all classes, why just this one place, Okay,
thank you.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about securing partnerships and learnings and challenges around that.
Okay, so that is a breadth of questions, and feel free to take any one of them, but these are going to be kind of our final comments.
I'll quickly jump in and thank you. If I forget your name, the lady in yellow, Christina, and also speaking with the other person who was talking about Harlem and the isolation of working as an entrepreneur. I think it's very crucial to have community, have a lot of support, and I'm speaking from a place where I do not tend to do that. I tend to be me, myself, and I in my business. I have a singular vision. I go for it, but I want to quit every day. I want to, I constantly question, constantly doubt what I'm doing because it is so tough when you don't have partners. So team building is extremely important. And if you're in a corporate environment where you don't, and it's a great question, where you don't want to turn your life around completely and go into the social, being an entrepreneur, within the system, bringing joy into it, having gratitude for what you're doing, because I think it's when I was working in corporate fashion, I didn't have as much gratitude for what I learned and for the place, and now today I have immense gratitude for that and the change that you can create from within by being who you are, your unique perspective.
Sure. I want to plus one everything you said. So for me, it's all of our work is really rooted in our humanity and understanding that we're animals, like we're literally organisms, we're social beings. So going back to the question around solopreneurs, and while that's great, we need to operate and work with people. We need people around us. They've done studies like when people are working in isolation, that actually causes distress and we end up getting sick. So that's really important, and I think this goes back to the question the first person asked around healthcare and the impact of media amongst doctors and other learners we have. So again, for us, it's really we're teaching tools that are technology is the medium through which we're teaching these tools, like perspective taking, pro-social behaviors. What are these tools? They're cultivation of compassion, empathy, joy, altruism. So these are literally things we can learn to be with. These are skill sets that a lot of scientists are studying. So that's what we're kind of giving. So these tools can be applied in this kind of anxiety-ridden, hyper-fast society for the learners that come onto our platform. And to the last gentleman, we're not just working in healthcare, we're working across the sectors, but we need to start somewhere, and that's where we're really making the dent. And of course, we have a lot of other clients that are working in other sectors, but to really create a foolproof, bulletproof model, we want to start out in the healthcare sector. But of course, the goal is to move beyond that, and not just in the US, beyond too.
Thank you, Anna.
Yes, to the young lady who talked about partnerships, I think it's really important for them to be authentic and also to know what your value is, your value proposition, and the company or nonprofit, and make sure that there is an alignment, because partnerships can end up being window dressing if there's no value for the corporation or the nonprofit. So make sure you communicate your value and stick through the plan of carrying out your value for that partnership. And to the young lady who talked about, just wanting to find your tribe, I'd say there's a lot of ways to do that. Meetup groups, for one, there's so many meetup groups, and also ways of connecting with other female entrepreneurs. I'm part of a group where it's called Founders. I meet with other women founders once a month, and we talk about issues, challenges, and we help each other. And that's the goal of the group, is to help each other amplify our work.
Well, all the questions were answered, so I get to just say what I want to say, right? But across all of it, and hopefully in all of your minds. And Werby, we could go on for another hour or so, this. But two things I just hope you would remember. By the way, my Twitter handle is @Embertime, EMBERTIME. If you're going to go into entrepreneurialism, know Monisha's been very transparent, right? This crap is hard. I feel like quitting every day. She's absolutely right. Entrepreneurialism essentially is not for everyone. I'm convinced of that. We all have ideas. I'm also very clear about that. Everyone has an idea. But sometimes you want to join up with a team and go from there. If you're going to really stick your neck out and go for this entrepreneurial track, know that it's hard, but know that you can succeed. As soon as you start putting hurdles in front of yourself, those self-inflicted hurdles, it's going to make it so much more difficult. I've tried my best in my entrepreneurs. I'm in my third startup. I've been successful in 2 of the 3. One was a failure, and people say, "Oh, Clayton, how did it feel to fail?" And I tell them all the time, I didn't fail. The business failed. That's a tweet. But anyway, let me finally say that if you don't do one thing, I'm telling you one thing you have to do, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. But I'm talking to those who have the for-profit mindset, like the kitchen guy. Get a customer. We spend so much time, I got to raise some money, nobody's giving me a loan or nobody's giving me anything. Go get a customer. I built my first, thank you very much, that's right? I built my first startup on just operations. I had enough money, luckily, to seed the business myself. And I'll never forget, because I was making so much money in corporate, when I bounced out onto entrepreneurialism, I felt like, wow, what happened to all the money? And I'll never forget that American Express gave me $1 million. I had never been given $1 million at my job. So American Express, hey, Clayton, this is $1 million, do this for us. I looked at that check, I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And I thought, I'm gonna get $1 million every week. This is how it's gonna happen. In 6 months, I was looking for money like a crackhead. I was like, what's going on, man? And so the point I'm saying is, get customers. You can fund yourself through customers, and people who have money will be much more apt to give you money if you've been making money. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that advice and insight. It's helped me out quite a bit.
That's all great advice, so thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, but before I do that, I want a really tremendous applause for this incredible panel.
Thank you once again. It was really a treat to hear all of your very helpful
insights. We're going to come off the
insights.
stage so you have your little moment for talking. So is that okay?
Well,
how long are you?
I'm not going to take very long.
Okay,
I just it doesn't matter where you are, you can all listen. I want to just, on behalf of the Impact Entrepreneurship team, I want to thank the staff and volunteers who helped both tonight and in the weeks leading up to tonight. Francisca is over here taking photos tonight, but she did a lot more behind the scenes. I'd also like to thank the Kauffman Foundation for their generous support of this important work around diversity, inclusion, and entrepreneurship. And then what you see on the slide behind me here is an overview of the various programmatic components of this broader umbrella under the Impact Entrepreneurship Initiative. Our mission broadly is to support early stage entrepreneurial leaders, as you've heard, in developing the mindsets, the skills, and also the sense of purpose so they can thrive in our rapidly changing world. And we're trying to break down barriers by making education, resources, and networks more accessible to students at diverse stages from different backgrounds. So the graduate fellowship in the red at the top is we've launched our first cohort of fellows this year. I think I saw a few other. Are there any fellows still here? I thought I saw a few earlier tonight. There are 18 master's students who've just started their programs at the New School from all different degrees, representing all different degree programs. It's a 2-year cohort experience for high potential impact entrepreneurs, and it's intended to address the lack of diversity within the entrepreneurship sector here in the US. Fellows receive scholarship funding, and they're admitted at the time of admission to the New School. So the priority deadline this year will be January 30th. If you know anyone who might be interested in this opportunity, we have postcards outside and more info on our website. This includes a scholarship as well. if I didn't mention that. And then the Venture Lab. So Clayton was just talking about getting customers. The Venture Lab is a course now offered at the new school for 3 credits all semester, by application only, all about business model validation, right? Design-driven, social impact focus. Sundar participated in the Venture Lab this past spring. The deadline is coming up Thursday this week for any last-minute applicants in the audience now. We've got 2 more days. Anyone else? Kevin was here earlier. We had 11 teams in the Venture Lab this past year, receiving mentorship and seed funding to validate their assumptions in terms of their value propositions, so that they can develop financially sustainable ventures with the potential for scalable impact that address social needs. And then the graduate minor is also new. This is a credential for grad students that will appear on transcripts. Anyone can take 3 additional elective courses if they would like to, all related to impact entrepreneurship, various aspects. So it could be leadership, could be social impact, management, innovation. And if they choose these courses from our list of eligible offerings, they will receive this credential in their transcript. We couldn't do this work without a much broader ecosystem of support. So I don't know if any of you are entrepreneurs yourselves or looking to partner or invest in some high potential impact entrepreneurs, but we're always seeking mentors as well as funding and partnerships. Nicole is here, so she is, along with myself, the lady to talk to about mentorship opportunities for the fellows as well as the Venture Lab. On Thursday, November 1st, so a month from yesterday, we're going to be offering a networking event for anyone who wants to learn more about mentorship opportunities, or even kind of spread the word to people about our fellowship and other offerings here. So please ask us if you have questions, or look at our website for more info. We couldn't do this without a broader network of support. Obviously, it's a lot to take on, but at this point, we'd love to invite you all to a reception. Please continue the conversation with our panelists if they can stay for a little longer, and also with the other people in the room. Maybe you'll find a potential partner or a collaborator. So thank you again for joining us, everyone.